Right now, somewhere over Iran, one of the most consequential unmanned aircraft in history is circling in the dark. No pilot on board, no heartbeat in the cockpit, just a machine, loitering at altitude, watching, waiting, and when the order comes, killing. It is the MQ-9 Reaper, and in the spring of 2026, it is writing some of the most important chapters of its nearly two-decade combat history. Operation Epic Fury began on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched a coordinated wave of strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, air defense networks, ballistic missile infrastructure, and military command centers. It is the most intensive American air campaign since the opening nights of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003. Stealth bombers, carrier-based fighters, cruise missiles, and electronic warfare jets have all played starring roles, but quietly, operating at altitude and relayed through satellite links to ground control stations thousands of miles away, the MQ-9 Reaper has become the unblinking eye and, when necessary, the long arm of the entire campaign. U.S. Central Command, which is leading the operation, has confirmed that MQ-9 Reapers are flying over Iran as part of Epic Fury, but has declined to discuss specifics. What defense journalists and analysts have been able to piece together paints a picture of a drone doing everything it was designed to do in the hardest environment it has ever faced. At any given time, the Wall Street Journal has reported, the U.S. Air Force is flying at least 10 simultaneous MQ-9 orbits over Iranian territory. Each orbit represents a Reaper circling a defined area, watching the ground below with electro-optical and infrared sensors, mapping the positions of mobile missile launchers, radar sites, and air defense batteries. When a target is identified and cleared for engagement, the Reaper does not necessarily need to make the kill itself. Footage released by CENTCOM shows what appears to be Reaper targeting systems painting Iranian missile launchers with laser designators, while bombs dropped from other aircraft guide themselves to the illuminated targets. The Reaper is acting as a forward air controller with unlimited patience and no risk to a human crew. But the Reapers are also doing direct strikes. Video released in early March 2026 shows an MQ-9 firing an AGM-114 Hellfire missile against a ground target inside Iran. Reports indicate the aircraft are also deploying GBU-39 Small Diameter Bombs, 250-pound precision glide weapons that allow the Reaper to engage from standoff distances and carry a larger number of munitions per sortie than traditional Hellfire configurations. The combination of persistent surveillance, dynamic targeting, and precision strike is exactly what the Reaper was designed to provide. And it is working. Israeli military sources have claimed that roughly 70% of Iran's ballistic missile launchers have been destroyed. That figure, if accurate, would represent a targeting success that eluded American forces during the 1991 Gulf War, when entire wings of aircraft spent weeks hunting Iraqi Scud launchers and found almost nothing. The difference in 2026 is persistent, unmanned surveillance. The Reaper finds, tracks, and either strikes or illuminates targets with a patience that no manned aircraft crew can match. But Operation Epic Fury is also revealing something that military analysts have warned about for years. The MQ-9 Reaper, for all its capability, is not built for contested airspace. As of mid-March 2026, confirmed losses of MQ-9 Reapers in the campaign have climbed to at least 12 aircraft, with some reporting suggesting the number could be higher. The losses have occurred through multiple methods. Iranian surface-to-air missile systems have been the primary cause, including electro-optical and infrared-guided systems whose passive sensors provide little or no advance warning before they fire. Unlike radar-guided missiles, which emit detectable radar emissions that can trigger onboard warning systems, passive infrared seekers simply watch for the heat signature of an aircraft without announcing their presence. Several Reapers have been shot down by Iranian air defense forces over central Iran, over the southern provinces near the Persian Gulf, and in the Hormozgan region. One was downed over Isfahan. a city home to major military and industrial facilities. At least one was reportedly destroyed on the ground by an Iranian attack on a base in the region. And in one of the more embarrassing incidents, a Reaper was reportedly shot down in a friendly fire incident by Qatari air defense forces during a period of intense and confusing regional air activity. A drone was also shot down over Basra in eastern Iraq by pro-Iranian militia forces, expanding the geographic scope of the losses beyond Iranian territory itself. Each MQ-9 costs between $13 and $16 million in base airframe cost, though the full system, including ground control station, satellite link infrastructure, and sensor packages, represents a much larger investment. 12 confirmed losses represents well over $150 million in hardware, and combined with earlier Reaper losses in Yemen against Houthi forces in 2025, the Air Force has now lost as much as 10% of its entire Reaper fleet in roughly a year of high-intensity operations. And yet, military experts are arguing that the losses are not a sign of failure. They are a sign of strategic logic. Retired Brigadier General Houston Cantwell, a former F-16 and MQ-9 pilot who commanded the 732nd Operations Group at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, has made the argument plainly. "Would you rather have a manned platform flying in this vulnerable state," he asked rhetorically, "or would you rather have an unmanned platform tying all the pieces together, finding dynamic targets, and calling in strikes?" For Cantwell, the answer is obvious. A lost Reaper is an expensive problem. A lost F-16 or F-35 is potentially a dead pilot, a rescue operation that puts more lives at risk, or, in the worst case, an American service member captured by the enemy. The 1993 incident in Mogadishu, Somalia, where the bodies of U.S. Army aviators were dragged through the streets, remains a permanent fixture in the American military's institutional memory. Reapers carry no crew to lose. Operation Epic Fury is also demonstrating something that goes beyond the traditional counter-terrorism role that defined the Reaper's first 18 years of combat service. For most of its life, the Reaper hunted insurgents in Afghanistan, killed al-Qaeda operatives in Yemen, and struck ISIS positions in Syria. Those missions happened in permissive airspace, where no one was shooting back with anything sophisticated. Iran is different. Iran has layered air defenses, radar networks, mobile surface-to-air missile systems, and the support of allied militia forces across the region. Operating in that environment and still generating intelligence, still hitting targets, still forcing Iranian air defense systems to stay suppressed or risk being destroyed, represents a maturation of the platform that even its designers may not have fully anticipated. What you are watching over Iran in 2026, in real time, is the Reaper fighting the war it was never quite designed for, and proving that even an imperfect tool, applied with enough numbers and tactical creativity, can shape a campaign at the strategic level. But to understand why that matters, you need to understand what the MQ-9 Reaper actually is, not just as a weapon system, but as a piece of engineering, as a collection of sensors and software and airframe decisions, as a machine that changed how the world thinks about war. The MQ-9 Reaper is a medium-altitude, long-endurance, unmanned aircraft. That designation, medium-altitude, long-endurance, is often abbreviated as MALE, and it describes a specific category of aircraft defined not by speed or stealth, but by the ability to fly high enough to stay out of most small arms fire and man-portable air defense systems, and long enough to provide the kind of surveillance and strike persistence that no manned aircraft can match. The basic specifications of the aircraft give you a sense of its scale. The Reaper is 36 feet long and stands 12.5 feet high. Its wingspan is 66 feet, roughly the same as a regional commuter jet, which surprises many people who have only seen the aircraft in photographs. That large wing is not an accident. It is the foundation of everything the Reaper does. A long wing generates high lift at low speeds, which is what allows the aircraft to loiter at altitude for extended periods without burning excessive fuel. The Reaper is not designed to go fast. It is designed to stay up. The aircraft is powered by a single Honeywell TPE 331-10 GD turboprop engine producing 900 shaft horsepower. That engine drives a three-bladed pusher propeller mounted at the rear of the fuselage, giving the Reaper its distinctive profile, with the propeller facing backward rather than forward. The turboprop configuration was chosen over piston engines for reliability and over jet engines for fuel efficiency at the altitudes where the Reaper operates. A turboprop provides far more power than the 115 horsepower Rotax piston engine of the older MQ-9 Predator, and the difference in capability is staggering. The Reaper carries 500% more payload than the Predator and has 9 times the horsepower. Maximum speed is 240 knots, or roughly 276 miles per hour. That is fast enough to reposition across a theater when needed, but it is not the aircraft's defining performance characteristic. Service ceiling is 50,000 feet, well above the engagement envelope of most shoulder-fired missiles, and most older generation surface-to-air missile systems. Standard endurance is over 27 hours, though the extended range variant, equipped with wing-mounted external fuel tanks, can achieve over 34 hours of flight time, and General Atomics has demonstrated configurations with endurance exceeding 40 hours. The maximum takeoff weight is 500 pounds for the standard MQ-9A, and the extended range variant raises that figure to 700 pounds. Internal fuel capacity in the standard configuration is 665 gallons. The external range tanks add significant additional capacity, and the engineering modifications made to support that extra weight include not just the fuel pods themselves, but reinforced landing gear, alcohol and water injection for the engine to manage heat under heavy load conditions, and structural reinforcement throughout the airframe. Payload capacity is where the Reaper truly separates itself from its predecessor. The aircraft can carry up to 850 pounds of total payload, split between internal and external carriage. Of that total, 3,000 pounds is available for external stores on 6 hardpoints, 2 on each wing, and 2 additional hardpoints available for fuel pods or additional weapons on the extended range configuration. That payload capacity makes the Reaper genuinely dangerous in a way the original Predator never quite was. The Predator could carry 2 Hellfire missiles. The Reaper can carry up to 14. The primary weapons carried by the MQ-9 in combat operations include the AGM-114 Hellfire missile in multiple variants, the GBU-12 Paveway-2 laser-guided bomb in the 500-pound class, the GBU-39 Enhanced Paveway-2, which adds both laser and GPS guidance modes, the GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack Munition, the GBU-54 Laser JDAM, which combines GPS inertial guidance with a laser seeker. Each weapon class gives the crew different options depending on the target type, the level of collateral damage concern, the weather conditions, and the available guidance methods. The AGM-114 Hellfire has been the Reaper's signature weapon since the aircraft entered service. The original Hellfire was an anti-armor missile designed to kill tanks, using a semi-active laser seeker to track a laser spot that either the firing aircraft or a forward-looking asset paints onto the target. Over its lifetime, the Hellfire family has expanded into a range of variants optimized for different missions. The AGM-114K, known as Hellfire 2, is the most widely used variant and offers improved accuracy and performance against armored targets. The AGM-114N thermobaric variant, sometimes called the metal augmented charge, uses a fuel-air explosive warhead that is particularly effective against personnel in the open or in enclosed spaces. And then there is a variant that was kept classified for years after its first use, and has since become one of the most discussed weapons in the American arsenal, the AGM-114R9X. The R9X is not a conventional missile. It carries no explosive warhead at all. Instead, a kinetic kill vehicle houses 6 retractable blades that deploy in the final moments before impact. The weapon strikes its target with enough kinetic energy to destroy it, while the lack of an explosive blast dramatically limits the radius of effect. The R9X was designed specifically for high-value targeted killings in environments where collateral damage concerns are extreme, where the target may be sitting in a vehicle surrounded by civilians, or in a building where other people are present. The weapon allows policymakers to authorize strikes with lower acceptable collateral thresholds than any explosive warhead could provide. It has been used in a series of targeted killings in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, always launched from MQ-9s, and its existence was not publicly confirmed until reporting in 2019. The sensor suite of the MQ-9 is as important as its weapons, and in many missions it is the more critical capability. The primary electro-optical and infrared sensor package is the Multispectral Targeting System B, built by Raytheon and designated MTS-B. The MTS-B is a turret-mounted system that integrates several sensor modes: a daylight color television camera, an image-intensified television camera for low-light conditions, an infrared sensor that detects temperature differences and produces thermal imagery, and a laser designator and illuminator for guiding weapons and marking targets for other aircraft. The system produces full-motion video and multiple channels simultaneously, and the different sensor modes can be viewed separately or fused together to give the crew maximum situational awareness in any lighting or weather condition. The range at which the MTS-B can identify and track targets is classified, but open-source reporting suggests it is effective at ranges that would keep the aircraft well outside the engagement envelope of most light weapons. The infrared mode in particular allows the Reaper to conduct surveillance at night with the same effectiveness it has during daylight, which is one of the reasons counterinsurgency operations in Afghanistan and Iraq relied so heavily on the platform. Alongside the MTS-B, the Reaper carries a Lynx synthetic aperture radar designated AN/APY-8. Synthetic aperture radar works by using the motion of the aircraft to synthesize a much larger effective antenna than the physical radar array, producing high-resolution imagery of the ground even through clouds, darkness, and obscurance like smoke or haze that would render optical sensors useless. The Lynx is particularly important for targeting joint direct attack munitions, which use GPS and inertial guidance systems that can be programmed with coordinates derived from radar imagery, as well as for dismounted target tracking, following individuals or small groups on foot across complex terrain. Some modified Reapers carry an additional sensor system called Gorgon Stare, which represents a fundamentally different approach to surveillance, where the MTS-B provides an extraordinarily detailed view of a small area. Gorgon Stare is a wide-area persistent surveillance system that can image an entire city block or larger area simultaneously, producing a continuous video record that analysts can use to reconstruct events hours or even days after they occurred. The system was developed in response to the limitations of traditional single-sensor surveillance, where a single camera watching one target could miss parallel activity elsewhere in the same area. Gorgon Stare allows analysts to review the entire pattern of life across a wide area, and then zoom into any portion of the imagery at will. The implications for targeting and intelligence exploitation are significant. The ground control station is as much a part of the MQ-9 system as the aircraft itself. A standard Reaper system, for accounting purposes, consists of 3 aircraft: a ground control station, line-of-sight and beyond line-of-sight satellite data links, ground support equipment, and the personnel and crews required for 24-hour continuous operations. The ground control station is essentially a cockpit on the ground, with 2 primary crew positions: the pilot, who flies the aircraft and manages the flight systems, and the sensor operator, who controls the cameras, radar, and weapons employment. Both crew members work from screens rather than windows, managing an aircraft that may be flying over a combat zone thousands of miles away. The data link architecture that makes this possible is layered. When the aircraft is within line-of-sight range of a ground station, typically within a few hundred miles, it uses a direct radio link for low-latency communication. For operations at extended range, over the horizon, the aircraft connects through commercial and military geostationary satellites. The satellite link introduces a small but real communication delay, typically measured in fractions of a second to a second or more depending on routing, which pilots are trained to account for in their flying. A technique called remote split operations further extends the operational flexibility of the system. A small crew at a forward base launches and recovers the aircraft using line-of-sight links, then transfers control to a different crew in a ground control station on the other side of the world for the operational portion of the mission. The crews can hand off back and forth as needed, effectively giving the aircraft unlimited pilot shifts without the aircraft ever needing to land. The operational employment of the Reaper reflects the unique capabilities the technology enables. A single combat air patrol, the unit of measure for unmanned aircraft presence, typically consists of multiple aircraft maintained at varying states of readiness so that one aircraft is always on station over the target area while others are in transit, refueling, or undergoing maintenance. The Air Force measures its global presence in combat air patrols, and at the height of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was flying 65 simultaneous CAPs around the world, each one representing an unblinking eye over a different piece of critical territory. The multi-domain operations configuration, known as M2DO, represents the most current evolution of the MQ-9 platform and the Air Force's attempt to extend the aircraft's relevance beyond the permissive counterterrorism environments where it made its reputation. The M2DO package flew for the first time in November 2022 and has been undergoing fleet-wide retrofitting. It adds enhanced data link robustness to improve survivability against electronic jamming and signal disruption, plug-and-play system integration to simplify the addition of future sensors and payloads, double the electrical power generation to support advanced electronics, and improve resilience against the cyber and electronic warfare threats posed by peer adversary air defense networks. The M2DO is the Air Force's answer to the challenge that Iran and similar adversaries represent, an attempt to keep the Reaper relevant in contested airspace, even as the next generation of unmanned aircraft is developed. The extended range variant, which received its initial operating capability designation in 2015, is the physical platform on which most of these upgrades are applied. Beyond the fuel tanks and landing gear changes, the extended range configuration also includes a four-bladed propeller that improves efficiency and reduces the distinctive acoustic signature of the standard three-bladed version, though both variants remain audible at medium altitudes under quiet conditions. What the Reaper's specifications do not fully capture is the operational concept that makes the platform genuinely revolutionary. It is not the individual capabilities in isolation. It is the combination of persistence, sensor quality, weapons diversity, and the ability to project the awareness and strike power of a sophisticated combat aircraft over a target area without any of the human factors that limit how long and how intensively a manned crew can operate. An F-16 pilot reaches cognitive and physical exhaustion. A Reaper crew gets relieved and another crew slides into the same seats. The aircraft keeps flying. The eye never closes. That fundamental characteristic, the unblinking watch, changes how commanders plan campaigns and how adversaries must think about hiding from American military power. The weapons the Reaper carries and the sensors it employs are products of decades of refinement. But the aircraft itself, the airframe, and the operational concept came from a much stranger and more circuitous path than most people realize. The story of the MQ-9 begins not with a military requirement, but with a garage, an Israeli immigrant engineer, and a series of Defense Department experiments that most people had never heard of before they produced the most influential weapons system of the post-Cold War era. Abraham Karam was born in Baghdad in 1937 to Jewish parents and grew up in Israel, where he became an aeronautical engineer and worked on Israeli Air Force programs before emigrating to the United States in the late 1970s. He settled in Los Angeles and, working out of his garage in Hacienda Heights with a small team, began developing a long-endurance unmanned aircraft on essentially no budget. His motivation was a problem that had plagued the American and Israeli militaries for decades. The existing small unmanned aircraft used for reconnaissance were unreliable, difficult to fly, and prone to crashes. Karem believed he could build something better. By 1983, he had produced a prototype called the Albatross that attracted the attention of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, known as DARPA. With DARPA funding, the design evolved into a more capable vehicle called the Amber, which demonstrated the long-endurance, stable flight characteristics that Karem had been pursuing. The Amber led to a production-viable design called the GNAT 750, and Karem's company, along with the GNAT program, was acquired by General Atomics, a San Diego-based defense and technology company. The GNAT 750 found its first operational users not in the military, but in the intelligence community. The Central Intelligence Agency operated GNAT 750 aircraft over Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1993 and 1994, conducting reconnaissance during the conflict there. The missions had significant technical problems, particularly with communication links, but they demonstrated a fundamental truth that would drive defense spending for the next 3 decades. Persistent unmanned surveillance over a conflict area provided a quality of intelligence that no other method could match at comparable cost. In the winter of 1992, even before the CIA's Bosnian operations, the U.S. Joint Staffs and the Office of the Secretary of Defense had initiated a quick reaction program for a long-endurance unmanned aircraft to meet emerging needs from the wars in the Balkans. The program moved with unusual speed, with the first flight occurring within 6 months of contract award. A year later, a derivative design called the Predator was operating over Bosnia, providing real-time, full-motion video directly to commanders. The platform was officially designated RQ-1, with the R indicating reconnaissance and the Q indicating unmanned. What the DARPA experiments and the Bosnian operations revealed was that long-endurance unmanned aircraft were not just interesting technology demonstrations. They were answering a military need that had previously been served by nothing. Manned aircraft could fly reconnaissance missions, but they could not loiter over an area for 24 hours. Satellites could provide overhead imagery, but their orbits were predictable, their schedules known to adversaries, and their coverage intermittent. Ground-based intelligence networks were slow and dependent on having people in the right places. The Predator split the difference, providing both the persistence of a satellite and the flexibility of an aircraft at a fraction of the cost of either. The Predator was deployed to support Operation Deliberate Force in Bosnia in 1995, flying reconnaissance missions that provided intelligence to NATO commanders during the air campaign against Bosnian Serb forces. By the late 1990s, the aircraft was conducting missions over Kosovo and across the broader Balkans region. Even then, the Air Force recognized the platform's limitations and was already thinking about what it would take to build something better. The answer that General Atomics developed was internally funded, beginning development as a private venture in 1998 before securing NASA funding. The company called the new design the Predator B. Where the original Predator had been designed primarily as a reconnaissance platform and only later adapted to carry weapons, the Predator B was conceived from the beginning as a dual-role hunter-killer, capable of both persistent surveillance and precision strike, with a weapons payload that dwarfed anything the original Predator could carry. The first proof-of-concept aircraft, designated Predator B-001, made its first flight on February 2, 2001. It was powered by an Allied Signal Garrett turboprop engine, producing 950 shaft horsepower, and had an airframe based on the Predator, but with a significantly enlarged fuselage and wings, stretched from 48 feet to 66 feet. The B-001 demonstrated a speed of 220 knots, a payload capacity of 750 pounds, a ceiling of 50,000 feet, and an endurance of 30 hours, performance figures that were transformational compared to the original Predator. General Atomics refined the design in 2 parallel directions. One path produced the B-002, a jet-powered variant using a Williams FJ-44 turbofan engine. optimized for higher altitude and ceiling at the cost of shorter endurance. The other path continued with the turboprop configuration, which the Air Force ultimately chose for its superior fuel efficiency and endurance. After the September 11th attacks in 2001, the pace of development accelerated significantly. The Air Force acquired two prototype aircraft designated MQ-9A in 2003 for evaluation and testing. The months and years immediately after September 11th also transformed the MQ-1 Predator, the older and less capable predecessor aircraft, in ways that would shape the entire trajectory of American drone warfare. The CIA and the Air Force had been working since the late 1990s on the question of whether the Predator could be armed. The original aircraft was a reconnaissance platform with a reconnaissance pilot, and the culture of the intelligence community was not oriented toward weapons employment. But the opportunity to track and potentially strike Osama bin Laden and other senior al-Qaeda figures from above, without risking a human crew over hostile Afghan territory, was too compelling to ignore. By early 2001, before the September 11th attacks, test programs had successfully integrated AGM-114 Hellfire missiles onto the MQ-1 Predator, and the aircraft had demonstrated the ability to locate a stationary target, designate it with an onboard laser, and fire a missile that guided to the impact point. The transformation from reconnaissance drone to hunter-killer was complete, at least in prototype. Within weeks of the September 11th attacks, armed Predators were deployed to Afghanistan and were conducting the first armed drone strikes in history over Afghan territory. The significance of that transformation cannot be overstated. When the first Hellfire left a Predator's hardpoint in combat in 2001, it marked the beginning of a new era in warfare, one defined by the ability to conduct persistent precision strikes against specific individuals from unmanned platforms without risking the lives of the striking force. Every policy and legal debate about targeted killing by drone, every news story about strikes in Pakistan or Yemen or Somalia, every academic argument about the ethics of remote warfare traces its origins to that moment in late 2001 over Afghanistan. Development of the MQ-9A continued through 2003 and 2004, with the formal designation MQ-9A allocated to the turboprop Predator B variant in February 2003. The M in the designation indicated the aircraft was multi-mission, capable of both reconnaissance and attack, which reflected the integrated hunter-killer philosophy that had been baked into the design from the beginning. Two prototypes underwent extensive testing and evaluation by the Air Force over the following years, and in 2006, the Air Force officially assigned the name Reaper to the MQ-9A. The name was not chosen casually. The Secretary of the Air Force at the time, Michael Wynne, selected Reaper specifically because it conveyed the aircraft's purpose. Where the Predator hunted, the Reaper harvested. The name became controversial almost immediately in some quarters, criticized as unnecessarily aggressive for an Air Force that was also publicly discussing the importance of precision and minimizing collateral damage. But the name stuck, and it captured something real about the aircraft's design philosophy. The Reaper was not an adaptation. It was a purpose-built killing machine with surveillance as a supporting capability rather than the primary mission. On May 1, 2007, the Air Force activated the 432nd Wing at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada to operate both the MQ-9 Reaper and the MQ-1 Predator. Creech, a small installation in the Nevada desert about 35 miles north of Las Vegas, became the center of American drone warfare. Its unremarkable buildings and endless rows of ground control stations housed the pilots and sensor operators who would fly more combat hours in the following decade than almost any other group of military aviators in history, and who would do so without ever leaving the continental United States. The first combat missions by the 432nd Wing's Reaper pilots took place in Iraq and Afghanistan in the summer of 2007, and on October 28, 2007, the MQ-9 Reaper achieved its first combat kill, firing a Hellfire missile against Afghan insurgents in the Deh Rawood region of Oruzgan province. By March 2008, Air Force Lieutenant General Gary North confirmed the Reaper had attacked 16 separate targets in Afghanistan using 500-pound bombs and Hellfire missiles. The platform's combat career had begun. Afghanistan was the Reaper's first sustained combat theater, and in many ways the most formative. The war in Afghanistan presented conditions that were almost ideally suited to what the Reaper could do. The country had no air defense network. Afghan insurgents had no surface-to-air missiles capable of reaching the altitudes at which Reapers typically operated. The terrain was rugged and the distances were vast, making ground-based surveillance difficult and manned air patrols expensive and limited in duration. The Reaper could loiter over a valley or a mountain pass for a full day, watching patterns of life, tracking vehicles, identifying individuals based on their behavior and associations, and striking at the moment of maximum certainty. The concept of pattern of life analysis, which sounds clinical and bureaucratic, represented a genuine revolution in how the military pursued targets. Traditional intelligence had always been episodic, capturing snapshots of adversary activity at specific moments in time. Persistent, unmanned surveillance allowed analysts to watch a compound for days or weeks at a time, building a comprehensive picture of who lived there, who visited, what vehicles were used, when activity patterns changed. When a target finally emerged in a location and at a time that permitted a clean strike, the decision could be made and the weapon employed within seconds because the intelligence picture was already fully developed. The Reaper did not operate in isolation in Afghanistan. It was the tip of a targeting system that included signals intelligence from the National Security Agency, human intelligence from CIA and military sources, liaison relationships with Afghan government and tribal officials, and the fusion of all these sources in joint operation centers. But the Reaper provided something those other sources could not: the ability to watch continuously, across multiple shifts of operators, maintaining a single unbroken thread of surveillance that made the full pattern visible over time. By 2010, the MQ-9 and its predecessor, the MQ-1 Predator, were flying over 33,000 close air support missions annually in Afghanistan alone. That figure represented a fundamental shift in how the Air Force operated. Close air support, the mission of providing air cover and strike capability to ground troops in direct contact with the enemy, had traditionally been the province of fast jets like the A-10 Warthog and the F-16. Those aircraft could provide devastating firepower, but they could not stay overhead for more than a few hours before fuel forced them to return to base. The Reaper could loiter above a patrol for an entire day, watching for threats, guiding troops around ambush sites, and striking enemy forces attempting to maneuver against friendly ground forces. The CIA and Joint Special Operations Command also used MQ-9 Reapers in Afghanistan for targeted killing operations against senior Taliban and al-Qaeda leadership. These missions, often authorized under covert Title 50 authority, rather than the military's Title 10 framework, were rarely acknowledged at the time and remain only partially documented. But the pattern of operations that developed in Afghanistan, combining military and intelligence community Reapers in a system that tracked, targeted, and struck high-value individuals, became the template for counter-terrorism operations around the world for the following decade. Operations expanded to Pakistan, where the CIA conducted an extensive drone program against al-Qaeda and affiliated groups in the federally administered tribal areas along the Afghan border. The Pakistan program was politically and legally controversial from its beginning, involving strikes against individuals in the territory of a nominally allied country without the public acknowledgement of that country's government. The full details of how many Reaper and Predator flights were conducted over Pakistan, how many strikes were executed, and what the full casualty count was among both intended targets and bystanders remains contested. Investigations by human rights organizations and journalists documented a substantial number of civilian deaths that were not captured in official government counts, and the program generated significant diplomatic friction with Pakistan over the years it operated. Iraq was a parallel theater of Reaper operations from the beginning. The aircraft were deployed to support operations against insurgent networks in Iraq from 2007 onward, providing the same persistent surveillance and strike capabilities that were proving decisive in Afghanistan. The Iraqi insurgency was a more urban and network-dependent target set than the Taliban in Afghanistan, and the Reaper's ability to follow individuals through city streets and track vehicles across road networks made it particularly valuable for unraveling the organizational structures of groups like al-Qaeda in Iraq. A notable incident in Afghanistan illustrated both the capability and the fragility of the system. On September 13, 2009, a Reaper that had lost communication with its ground control station and departed from its assigned operating area was shot down by a US F-15E fighter jet to prevent it from wandering into Tajik airspace. The incident highlighted the challenge of maintaining reliable control links over the distances and terrain of Afghanistan, and it drove subsequent development of more robust communication architectures, including the encrypted satellite data links that became standard on later aircraft, and the M2DO configuration. By 2011, the Air Force was training more pilots for advanced unmanned aerial vehicles than for any other single weapon system. That fact captures the scale of the institutional shift that had occurred. An Air Force built around the F-15, the F-16, the B-52, and later the F-22 and F-35, an Air Force whose culture had been defined for decades by the fighter pilot and the bomber crew, was now investing its training capacity most heavily in the Reaper and its predecessor. In October 2011, the Air Force began operating Reapers out of Arba Minch Airport in Ethiopia for surveillance-only operations in Somalia. The Horn of Africa had become a center of al-Qaeda-affiliated activity, with the group al-Shabaab controlling large portions of southern Somalia and conducting terrorist operations across the region. The Reaper provided coverage of the vast and difficult Somali terrain that no other American intelligence collection platform could match, and the operations from Ethiopia provided the surveillance foundation for a series of strikes against al-Shabaab and al-Qaeda East Africa leadership in the years that followed. In October 2013, the combined USAF fleets of MQ-1 Predators and MQ-9 Reapers reached a total of 2 million combined flight hours. The program had taken roughly 16 years to accumulate the first million hours. It took just 2.5 more years to reach the second million. The demand for persistent unmanned surveillance had become essentially unbounded. In Libya, following the September 2012 attack on the U.S. diplomatic compound in Benghazi that killed Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans, both Reapers and Predators were deployed to provide surveillance over the region and to support the subsequent investigation and targeting work against the groups responsible. The rise of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, beginning in 2013 and reaching its peak territorial control of roughly a third of Iraq and a third of Syria by 2014, created a new and massive operational demand for MQ-9 capabilities. Operation Inherent Resolve, the American-led military campaign against ISIS launched in August 2014, relied heavily on Reaper surveillance and strike to attack the organization across a vast and complex theater. ISIS presented a target set that was in some ways similar to al-Qaeda and in some ways very different. Al-Qaeda had operated as a clandestine network, dispersed, compartmented, and hard to find. ISIS at its peak controlled cities, operated military formations, maintained administrative infrastructure, and moved large numbers of fighters and vehicles across open terrain. That combination of conventional military behavior and terrorist tactics created both opportunities and challenges for Reaper operations. On November 13, 2015, the Pentagon confirmed that an MQ-9 had killed ISIS member Mohammed Emwazi, known publicly as Jihadi John, in a strike near Raqqa, Syria. Emwazi had appeared in a series of propaganda videos produced by ISIS, in which he executed Western prisoners, and his high media profile had made him a priority target for Western governments. The Reaper strike killed him with precision that was only possible because of the persistent surveillance that had established his patterns of movement and provided the final confirmation of his location immediately before the weapon was fired. In 2015, Australia began flying MQ-9s over Syria, with 5 Royal Australian Air Force personnel embedded with the USAF 432nd Operations Group and performing operational duties as MQ-9 system pilots and sensor operators. This represented the first time Australia had expanded drone operations beyond Iraq during the broader counter-ISIS campaign. The Royal Air Force had begun operating its own Reapers in Afghanistan in 2007, with the initial fleet growing to around 10 aircraft. On November 10, 2014, an RAF Reaper conducted its first airstrike against Islamic State forces, firing a Hellfire missile at militants, placing an improvised explosive device near Baiji in Iraq. The following year, on September 7, 2015, Prime Minister David Cameron announced that 2 British ISIS fighters had been killed in an intelligence-led RAF Reaper strike near Raqqa, Syria, marking the first armed use of British military assets in Syria during the conflict. France also deployed its MQ-9 fleet extensively in the Sahel region of Africa, conducting counter-terrorism operations in Mali, Niger, and neighboring countries against al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and other affiliated organizations. The French operations in Africa represent one of the less discussed but operationally significant uses of Reaper technology, conducted in a theater of operations that received far less Western media coverage than the Middle East, despite involving persistent and lethal drone activity. The January 3, 2020 strike at Baghdad International Airport that killed Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani represents perhaps the most consequential single MQ-9 mission in the aircraft's history. Soleimani was commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, the external operations arm of the IRGC, responsible for Iran's proxy warfare strategy across the Middle East. He was widely regarded as one of the most powerful and influential military figures in the region, responsible for building and sustaining the network of Shia militia groups that had fought American forces in Iraq, supported Assad in Syria, backed the Houthis in Yemen, and provided Hezbollah with its military capabilities. The strike killed Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, the deputy commander of the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, as their vehicles left the airport following a flight from Damascus. The weapon was reportedly the AGM-114R9X, the kinetic kill vehicle variant, which destroyed the vehicles with lethal precision while limiting the explosive blast. The political and strategic consequences of the strike were immediate and far-reaching, triggering Iranian ballistic missile attacks on American bases in Iraq that injured over 100 service members, setting off intense diplomatic and military maneuvering across the region, and permanently reshaping the dynamics of the U.S.-Iran confrontation. The strike also demonstrated something important about what the Reaper had become by 2020. It was no longer just a counter-terrorism tool for hunting low-level insurgents in remote mountains. It was capable of reaching into the most strategically sensitive target sets, striking individuals whose deaths would reverberate through international politics, as part of a decision cycle that extended from the Oval Office through the chain of command to a sensor operator and pilot at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada. In August 2020, 2 U.S. MQ-9 Reapers crashed in a mid-air collision over Syria. The incident was not combat-related, but it illustrated the density of drone operations in Syrian airspace at the time, with American, Russian, Turkish, and other forces all operating unmanned aircraft in a congested and complex airspace environment. Local reporting suggested at least one of the aircraft may have been shot down by opposition fighters or Turkish forces, though U.S. officials maintained both aircraft were lost in the collision. Russian interference with Reaper operations in Syria became an increasingly visible issue through 2023. On July 5 and 6 of that year, Russian fighter aircraft intercepted U.S. Air Force MQ-9s over Syria and deployed flares in front of them, damaging at least one aircraft's propeller. On July 23, another Russian aircraft intercepted a Reaper, again deploying flares. These incidents were part of a broader pattern of Russian harassment of American unmanned aircraft in Syrian airspace. reflecting Moscow's discomfort with American persistent surveillance near Russian-supported Syrian government forces. Yemen introduced a new and troubling dimension to the Reaper's combat story. Beginning in late 2023 and accelerating through 2024 and 2025, Houthi rebels operating in Yemen demonstrated a consistent and growing capability to down American MQ-9 Reapers, using a combination of surface-to-air missiles and other air defense systems. On November 8, 2023, Houthi forces shot down a U.S. Air Force MQ-9 over the Red Sea. On February 19, 2024, another Reaper was shot down over the port city of Al Hudaydah. On April 25, 2024, a third was brought down over Saada Governorate. The pace of losses continued through 2024 and into 2025 during Operation Rough Rider, the American military campaign against Houthi forces. By the time Operation Epic Fury began in early 2026, the Houthis had shot down over a dozen MQ-9s, creating significant concerns about the aircraft's survivability against adversaries with any meaningful air defense capability. The Iraqi militia threat also materialized concretely in January 2024, when the Islamic Resistance of Iraq claimed to have shot down a U.S. MQ-9 near Muqtadiya in Diyala province after it departed Kuwait. That shootdown, followed by the loss of a Reaper over Basra in March 2026, illustrated how Iranian proxy networks were developing and sharing air defense capabilities that complicated American unmanned operations across a broad geography. Throughout the Syrian civil war and the ongoing counter-ISIS campaign that ran parallel to it, Reapers were responsible for the majority of U.S. airstrikes in Syria during 2023, as the conflict involving various factions and the Israel-Hamas war intensified. The combination of persistent surveillance, flexible weapons carriage, and low costs compared to manned platforms made the Reaper the weapon of choice for operations that required precision, but where the threat environment was manageable. The broader record of Reaper operations across nearly 2 decades adds up to something genuinely unprecedented in the history of air power. The aircraft and its predecessor, the Predator, accumulated over 2 million combined flight hours by 2013, a figure that continued to grow through the decade that followed. It flew tens of thousands of combat sorties across Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Somalia. It killed senior leadership figures of multiple terrorist organizations, provided surveillance that saved the lives of ground forces on countless occasions, and demonstrated that unmanned aircraft could operate continuously over a combat theater in ways that no manned aircraft could replicate. A total of 338 MQ-9 Reapers were produced by General Atomics over the life of the program. The final aircraft was delivered to the Air Force in 2025, closing the production line after more than 2 decades of continuous manufacture. The current inventory stands at approximately 230 aircraft, reflecting a deliberate managed drawdown as the Air Force executes a phased retirement plan targeting around 140 retained aircraft through 2035, when a more survivable next-generation unmanned aircraft is expected to begin replacing the Reaper in high-threat roles. The operating cost of the Reaper, roughly $3,000 to $4,000 per flight hour, compared to $25,000 to $30,000 per hour for an F-16, is an economic argument that sustained the program through every budget battle for 2 decades. You could field 10 MQ-9s for the acquisition cost of a single F-35A. Those 10 Reapers could provide 10 simultaneous persistent orbits over different target areas. The math of counterterrorism and counterinsurgency, where the primary challenge was finding and continuously watching a dispersed enemy rather than defeating a conventional military force, made the Reaper the most cost-effective platform in the American arsenal for most of the conflicts of the post-September 11th era. What Operation Epic Fury is revealing is that the era of uncontested airspace that made that math so compelling is ending. Iran's air defenses have proven that the Reaper cannot survive indefinitely in a contested environment without the suppression of enemy air defenses work done by manned aircraft and long-range missiles. The losses over Iran, over a dozen aircraft in roughly a month, are significant. but they are also not stopping the campaign. The Reapers keep flying, the orbits keep circling, and the targets keep dying. The Air Force has been open about its plan to phase out the Reaper by 2035, replacing it with a more survivable next-generation platform. The Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program, which is developing autonomous AI-controlled drone wingmen designed to operate alongside manned fighters in contested airspace, represents the future the service is investing in. The cost of those future aircraft, beating former targets at roughly one-third the cost of an F-35, suggests the economic logic that drove the Reaper's success is being replicated in the next generation, just with stealth and autonomy added to the performance equation. The MQ-9 Reaper changed how America fights wars. It changed the politics of military force by lowering the human cost of sustained military operations. It changed the technology of targeting by demonstrating that persistent surveillance could replace episodic intelligence collection as the foundation of a killing chain. It changed the culture of air power by producing an air force that was training more drone pilots than fighter pilots by 2011. And it changed the global conversation about the ethics and legality of warfare by conducting thousands of strikes against specific individuals in countries that the United States was not officially at war with. Over the burning landscape of Iran in the spring of 2026, the Reaper is still doing what it was designed to do. It is watching, it is waiting, and when the moment comes, it is still reaping